I truly believe that writing is best done when you're alone and emotional. And lucky for me, they call that the Keith Macri special. There are several things you need to do before words even hit the page that's going to help set you up for success. So when I say being emotional and alone, I really mean that more metaphorical than I do literal. If you're going to write, prepare yourself to be totally immersed in the story you're trying to tell. Be immersed in what you're trying to do. I think that's the only way to make yourself successful. If you're new to screenwriting, you may say, okay, I want to do this, I have a great idea, but where do I start? It's a great question, but the answer is pretty simple. It's conflict. What is the conflict in your story? What is the juxtaposition that is happening? Because if you don't have that, then you don't really have an idea. No one wants to watch a film where things start out okay and then only get better. There has to be some sort of conflict that happens that is preventing the story from moving forward. Flush that idea of conflict out as much as you can. Start to poke holes in it. Because if you can easily answer your question of conflict, then your premise isn't strong enough. So that's the first thing you need to focus on. Really, even before you start putting words on your page, you need to figure out what the problems are in this story that's preventing the narrative from moving forward. And I don't even mean good versus evil or good versus bad. It could be a conflict of ideas. It could be a conflict of personalities. There's so many different versions of what the issues in your narrative can be. Just find the yin and the yang to your story because it has to have that. The end of my screenplay is always the place I like to start. Once I have my conflict and my premise really ironed out and I feel very strong about it, I jump right to the end. Why? Because I consider my screenplay a roadmap. And the end is where I'm trying to get every single person to. So the two questions that I ask myself when I start thinking about the end of my film are really twofold. Physically, where do I want the characters and the stories to be at that point? How do I want it to physically end? And then two, emotionally, for my viewer, where do I want them to be? What do I want them to be feeling? What do I want them to be taking away? Do I want them to learn something? Do I want them to just be laughing uncontrollably? Do I want them to be sad? What is the emotional takeaway? So those two places become the X that marks my spot of where I'm trying to get you to. So the rest of the film is me trying to lead you there. And I may lead you all about in all different ways. I may misdirect you at some point. I may just bull through. But the point is, if I don't know where I'm going at the end, I'm not sure how you can efficiently lead me to that point. So that's why I always start there. Again, I do this before I even start writing. These are things I have to hammer out conceptually in my head before I really start typing dialogue and a random scene. These things I think are pivotal to the success of your screenplay. It doesn't have to be ironed out, not to say that you can't change it, you can't fix it, you can't rewrite. That's not what I'm saying. It's not set in stone. It's just this is going to give you the strongest jumping off point, in my opinion. There's nothing worse than a blank page. It literally just mocks me openly, and I hate it. It stares at me blankly and just says, Keith, you'll never be able to fill this page. You suck. And then I kind of cry a little bit. But once I wipe those tears away, I sit down and I start writing. This is the time to not censor yourself. Don't worry about story structure or character development. Only those things are going to prohibit you from moving forward because you're not ready to defend yourself at this point. You're not ready to go back and forth with yourself and say, oh, should that character be saying this? Or should this scene come before this scene? Or whatever the case may be, that you'll eventually get to those parts. But right now, you don't have anything. All you're trying to do at this stage, the blank page stage, is to get something down on paper to be able to start working. I wouldn't even consider it a first draft. It's just words on a page that resemble your story. If you were to think about it like you were going to whittle a wood statue, this isn't even the block of wood that you begin to whittle from. This is a tree trunk that sits in front of you, and all you're trying to do is loosely carve out a block that you will begin to sculpt. And the more you say, well, there's no room for a head here for my statue, the more you're going to give up on it. The quicker you're going to give up on it. Because there's nothing worse than a piece of writing that doesn't get finished. I would much rather have a piece of writing that is shit rather than a piece of writing that doesn't get finished. So at this stage, I encourage you to just let it go. Don't censor yourself. Don't limit yourself. Just write. Once you've put your words on a page, this is the point that is completely up to you. The screenplay could be done if you want it to, because you filled your page 1 through whatever, how many ever pages your screenplay is. You can say, yep, I'm done, I've done it, move on. But it's up to you to put in the level of effort and detail to make your screenplay the best it possibly can. So I urge you at this point, once you have all your words on your page and you have your general story kind of laid out, it's a skeleton, then you're going to go through multiple times. And every time you go through it from there, you should pick an individual thing you want to focus on. And you could do this as many times as you want, or as few times as you want, because again, it's up to you. You can call it done whenever you want. It's like a painting. For me, I tend to nitpick and really go through line by line and just watch this screenplay evolve over time. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it pretty high level, and for those who are more beginners and just trying to get through the process as seamlessly as possible. But if you have questions or thoughts or comments of really more detail-oriented things, put them in the comments, message me, whatever. I'm happy to talk through in much more detail. So there are 3 key things that I want to discuss, because new filmmakers, new screenwriters, I think these are things that they can easily overlook, and they will definitely help set your film up for success. One of the first things you should look for as you go through evolving your script is making sure that your characters have different voices. As most writers do, including myself, you write from your own perspective. You write from a sense of your own experiences. And sometimes new filmmakers, new screenwriters can just only put their perspective in, can only put their tone of voice in. And that's something you want to avoid, because that's going to make your script very one-dimensional. If you generally have a snarky, witty, comedic tone of voice, but every character sort of has that, and they sort of bleed into one another, then that makes your script very one-dimensional. You need to have diversity within your tone, not only within your characters, if it's a man, a woman, different ethnicities, whatever the case may be, but in how they portray themselves and who they are. There needs to be a diversity. So it's easy for people to get lost in their own style, their own voice and tone, or just variants of that, because that's where you feel comfortable speaking from. So when you go through and evolve your script, really focus on making sure there's a diversity in tone and voice within your characters. I want to be very clear about this. There's a huge difference between time, literal time, and pace in your screenplay. Now, if you're going to have people read your screenplay or you're going to go through it, there's all these sort of checkpoints in terms of time. 30 pages, 30 minutes for your first act on a feature. Oh, things need to happen quickly and upfront. I'm doing a lot of short films now, so I mentally tell myself, oh, things got to happen in the first 60 seconds, the first 120 seconds. It's a short film. People aren't going to give you the time. But there's a huge difference between that and pace. And even myself, I get lost in it, and I don't want you to either. Don't blankly look at your screenplay and say, oh, this needs to happen at this point because of the literal time that is happening. People go to Avengers films and watch 3 hours and 2 minutes of just an epic saga. The Irishman is 3.5 hours. People will commit the time to your screenplay, to your film, if the pace is right. If things are happening in a way that keeps them engaged and keeps the narrative moving forward, that's what you need to be focusing on. That's what you need to care most about, not your time. And I think a good example of this, or an easy way to see how well your film is paced, or to tighten up a pacing of your screenplay, is look at your ins and outs of scenes. The heads and tails of your scene can be throwing off your pace. The extra dialogue in your scene may be throwing off your pace, which may be equaling a page count, which may be equaling a runtime. But it's not the runtime. You don't have to worry about literal time within your screenplay. You don't have to worry about actual time. Just get me in and out. I can come in to a scene in the middle of dialogue, and I can leave the scene in the middle of dialogue. You just need to show me, the viewer, the important parts. The important parts of that moment, that scene, it could be 2 lines. That's all that was needed. Now I'm somewhere else. And doing things like that are going to help the pace of your film, which will help the engagement on your film. The time will be whatever the time is. So there is a clear distinction between the two. And when you go through your many evolutions of your screenplay, that's something you want to whittle away. You want to whittle away the unnecessary, the excess time that is slowing down your pace or ruining the flow and rhythm of your pace. Every single thing in your film must have purpose. It goes full circle back to the first thing that we talked about, is finding the end. If your film lacks purpose that is driving to that end, whether it be emotional or physically for the characters to be there, it is worthless and does not belong in your script. You need to be able to justify every line of dialogue, every piece of exposition, anything that goes into your script needs to be justifiable on some level that has a purpose that will pay off at the end. You may fall in love with things that lack purpose. You need to be very harsh with yourself. You need to be very difficult with yourself and poke holes in every single thing you can. Before you can call it finished, you should read through your script one last time and make sure every single thing is driving at your end game. When it comes to anything creative, the most important thing you can do is put your ego to the side and say, what's best for the film? What's best for this screenplay? What's going to be the best for the audience? They're more important than you. So if everything doesn't have a purpose, then it has to go.